Hello everyone, welcome to GreatLakes-TCG's YouTube channel. My name's Gardener Jeff. Just wanted to come in with a upload since it's been a while. We've been doing a lot of testing about OP09. We've had a lot of review of the Japanese meta, which I'm going to go over today. And I also want to discuss our next kind of project. It's the Road to Nationals. So every week or week and a half, me and the team are going to be kind of focusing on one specific deck and testing that deck into the variety of the meta. We're going to have an ongoing tier list that kind of updates with what we think is where we think everything is at after the week of testing. I'll try to be very transparent with all the different builds that I'm testing and the tech options that I use and what I think about them. Kind of like my old Purple Luffy videos, but kind of expanding the scope to other decks, especially as we get into OP09. Once again, Road to Nationals, me and the team are very, very excited. We booked our, our living arrangements, we booked our flights, and hopefully I get to see some of you guys over there. Please reach out to me if you're going to be at Nationals and we could kind of hang out. That said, kind of want to do a quick overview of the Japanese meta. So I'm kind of trying to paint a picture of what the Japanese meta looked like and how it's kind of changed over time and what we can learn from that. So this is back in November 3rd, back in the East. So essentially speaking, this is the time where Blue Doflamingo, Purple Luffy, and Rob Lucci were, and I guess Shanks kind of already came and gone. Those were like kind of the top dogs. The reason being is Blue Doflamingo has always been, the number one deck, I think, in terms of tops and consistently being played the most in Japan. At least up until November 3rd, it was getting a ton of wins. Purple Luffy was closely behind Blue Dofi because there's been changes to the list that kind of helped that matchup significantly. And initially it was very Blue Dofi favored, but now it seemed to be more Purple Luffy favored, or at least 50-50. Then we look at Rob Lucci kind of came into the meta, and you could see it a little bit in the next slide, but he's kind of died off since he's come in. So this 491, remember this is November 3rd, and we'll see what happens since then. But essentially speaking, Rob Lucci came in to combat Blue Dofi, but he found trouble when going as BY Luffy kind of came back into the meta, and as Teach kind of became the de facto #1 black deck. Prior to November 3rd, Teach was kind of on the lower end. It hasn't really been solved. People haven't really learned how to play it, but now we know how to play it, and we know it's actually really, really strong. I don't want to focus on too many of the other decks here. This is kind of just painting a picture of what the meta looked like back on November 3rd. And since then, we've had a few championships. So once again, thank you to Noah for providing this data. This is the every single championship in OP09. So Miyagi, Hokkaido, Fukuoka, and Hiroshima. Hyoto just happened, and I have the information for Hyoto that we're going to go over together. But I just wanted to paint the picture of what was going on coming into these championships. So I believe Miyagi was actually back on roughly around that same weekend of that November 3rd weekend, and then every single week since then we've had these last 3 championships. So Hiroshima was 2 weeks ago, Fukuoka was the week before that, and then Hokkaido was the week before that. Actually, no, that would line up Hokkaido with November 3rd. Regardless, as you can see, Blue Dofi's been very consistent. It tops every single week, multiple tops. The deck is very, very prevalent, and it's the most played deck in Japan. Blackbeard has kind of picked up in terms of play rate and in terms of tops. As we saw right here, Blackbeard kind of came in to combat the growing Lucci meta, and it also does very well against BY. As you could see, when Blackbeard does well, Lucci and BY were not doing well that week until they adapted, that is. And the next week, you see the Blackbeard, topping goes down. Shanks is also going down as Lucci comes in and Purple Luffy comes in. And so Purple Luffy was doing not that well in terms of official championship tops until just recently, where decks once again have adapted for Blue Dofi, but now they're also adapting for Teach, they're adapting for Shanks, and they're changing their lists up to kind of give them a small edge here and there in terms of what top end they're playing, the ratios they're playing, what blockers they're playing, and the 4 cost and 5 cost ratios. And I'm going to go over all that in a little bit. And then finally, the most recent, so this was 2 weeks ago where Purple Luffy actually ended up winning. Remember, we had Lucci win the first one, Blackbeard, then Luffy. And then BY Luffy won the last, this past weekend, which I'll get over in a second, just as a little bit of a spoiler. But going into Hyoto, we had Blue Luffy, Blackbeard, and Purple Luffy kind of being the decks to beat. And also BY Luffy kind of coming back in. As BY Luffy started teching in some cards to deal with Blackbeard, where it was initially a very bad matchup, now there's actually ways for, BY Luffy to kind of combat Blackbeard and kind of live past that. And lo and behold, those changes that they make to fight Blackbeard actually do well against Shanks, so to speak. So now you have ways to combat Shanks and combat Blackbeard, while also doing well into Dofi. That said, let's look at what happened in Hyoto. So this is once again the most recent and I believe the last OP09 regional championship over in Japan that's going to happen. I think they're going into OP10 this week. So we have, this was the spread of decks being played. You have, a tie between Shanks and Dofi being the #1 decks. You have Dofi at 89, Shanks at 89 decks. Remember, this is a 1,200, almost 1,300 player tournament. And so the fact that Shanks and, Blue Dofi were the top playing decks, it's actually kind of telling. People are playing Shanks, one, because it's, a little bit easier to play, but two, it technically should have good matchups into both Blackbeard, Dofi, and it should do well into BY Luffy on paper, that is. But we don't actually see that kind of translate to tops. I don't think any Shanks top this regional, unfortunately. So one thing I will say is that the new Purple Luffy list that won the championship before this actually does very well in the Shanks, as long as you see your curve. Next, we have Purple Luffy in representation at 70, then Lucci at 47, Teach only at 41. I'm very surprised to see Lucci being played over Teach, despite Teach winning 2 championships in a row. And obviously the prevalence of BY is kind of low at 32 only, but 3 of them, or actually 4 of them, I believe, make it to top 16. So that conversion rate for this championship is insane. Finally, we have 31 Bonnie and 22 Enel, and I'm gonna kind of leave it there. There's 19 Smoker, and you'll see why I'm saying that, and there's 15 BY or Black Purple Luffy, and finally 13 Red Purple Luffy. The reason why I mentioned those is, once again, thank you for OP Hirata for providing this data. But essentially speaking, you'll see right here, this was kind of the championship or tournament bracket. Right here, you see that there is 1 Red Purple Luffy that made it. You'll also see right here that there is a Black Purple Luffy that made it. Unfortunately, the Black Purple Luffy lost to Dofi, well, one of the Dofis in the top 16 bracket. But essentially speaking, as you could see here, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 BY Luffys make it, and only 1 Purple Luffy make it to the top 16. So this was kind of a little unprecedented. There's 1 Lucci that made it as well, but they ended up losing to the BY Luffy on this side of the bracket. Actually, it's really funny because I feel like there's a BY Luffy on every side of the bracket, so you really couldn't, you couldn't avoid it. That said, as you could see, 3 BY Luffys and 1 Bonnie made it into the top. That Bonnie ended up losing in semis, and it was a BY Luffy mirror for championships. What does this tell us? This tells us multiple things. 1, BY is a deck that we have to, we can't underestimate. We have to test our decks against it. It's going to show its face in our championships. 2, Blue Dofi is still very, very strong. It could probably go up against any deck in the meta, and we also need to be, teching for that. 3, Shanks has had multiple new list iterations come up. The most recent one that kind of grew in popularity was like the Red Hawk version with dragons. While that is good, I think it needs further testing and reiterations on it, because unfortunately, as we saw, there were just as many Shanks as Dofis, and while we had, 1, 2, 3 Dofis make it into the top, which is actually less than this is the lowest that's actually topped in the top 16. We don't actually see any Shanks convert, and those were the 2 tied for the 2 highest played decks, 15% each of the meta share. We had one smoker make it. Unfortunately, this smoker lost to BY Luffy, and this was on stream. I think the smoker misplayed a little bit, or could have played better. Regardless, BY Luffy kind of took that over. And then once again, unfortunately, the black purple Luffy couldn't. Where is he? Right here. Couldn't beat that Dofi out. I would love to have seen that deck on stream. Now, moving forward, I just want to talk to you guys regarding our schedule going, with hopefully the upload schedule. So it's going to be leader testing. It's kind of tentative. Hopefully once a week, I want to get up a video and kind of summarize my testing and my list. But we're going to start with Purple Luffy. Obviously, it's my bread and butter. I really have been focusing on Purple Luffy a lot going into this meta. I love it. The deck is really, really strong. I think I'm going to really enjoy making that video because I think it's actually much better in OP09 than I gave it credit for initially going in, especially looking at the the tops in Japan. I'm like, hey, why isn't it doing as well? But I'm really happy where the deck's kind of shaped up to be and where it's at. Then I'm going to test Shanks. The reason being is Shanks is, once again, it's tied with Blue Dofi as the most played deck in Japan, and yet it didn't top well. I don't think Shanks is bad by any means. I think it's still probably one of the top 3 or top 4 decks that you're going to see in Nationals. The issue is I think the optimal deck list for Shanks has not been proven yet. I don't think we know what Shanks lists are going to look like in January at all. I think there's a lot of testing to be done and a lot of iterations and changes we can make. There's a lot of events and a lot of cards in red that are being underutilized that I think we should be looking at. Blackbeard. So once again, this is kind of the new boogeyman in the meta. I think Blackbeard's a very, very strong deck. I've been doing a lot. Actually, this last week has been kind of like a pseudo Blackbeard week. I've been doing a lot of testing with Blackbeard. I love the deck. I actually really like its playstyle. People sometimes say, oh, it's boring because you're just vanilla leaders, but not really. Blackbeard's actually kind of really fun in the sense where it takes a lot of experience to play the deck well. You kind of have to know what every deck wants to do. And so me playing every single deck in this meta will actually get me better at being a Blackbeard player. And if that's the deck I end up choosing for Nationals, this is only going to help me. After Blackbeard, I want to play Dofi. It's just, the bread and butter of the meta. How can you not, learn Dofi for OP09, especially going into Blackbeard, learn Dofi into Shanks, and learn Dofi into the new iterations of Purple Luffy. Finally, Lucci. I know Lucci's kind of fallen out of the meta over in Japan, especially with the rise of BY Luffy, but I will say, let me just move this over here just for a little bit. I will say though, Lucci is a deck that can adapt. The black card pool is huge. I've seen a lot of Lucci's putting in 9-cost Kaido and other ways to kind of KO along with Jack, as basically ways to combat Blackbeard. I've even seen a Lucci really, really funny tech that what was it? It was, I think, a 2-cost event that's a Blackbeard event that kind of takes away the Blackbeard's leader ability on their turn as a counter event. And so you're actually able to sometimes, if you're not prepared for it, you can use the 2-cost event, use it as a counter, negate Blackbeard's leader ability for that turn, and then he's unable to black hole you, or leader ability and take away your on plays for that turn, and then you could play out your Moria in response. And I thought that was brilliant when I saw it in action. But now now I know about it, so there are ways around it. But it was like a nice tech that came out, really unexpected. Next I want to test is Bonnie. I think Bonnie, as you saw, there's only one Bonnie that made it into the top 16, but it actually ran the gauntlet. If BY is looking good, then Bonnie is looking good. Their list was actually really interesting because they were running a lot more top end than I expected. They were running like 3 of the 9-cost Shanks and stuff like that. So definitely want to take a look at that Bonnie list and see what changes I can make and see what I think about it. I think Bonnie's interesting because she's probably good into Purple Luffy, probably good into Dofi. I don't know how well she does into Shanks or Lucci still. Obviously, historically, she's not that good into Lucci, but, with the changes Lucci makes to kind of combat Blackbeard, maybe, they're less efficient into Bonnie. Finally, wanted to take a week or two to kind of go over a lot of the rogue decks. RP Luffy, BP Luffy, Foxy are all decks that have shown that they can do something. Obviously, this last weekend, both Red Purple and Black Purple Luffy topped once each in the top 16, one making it the top 8. Foxy kind of fell off in that one and done championship weekend where 2 Foxies made it to the top and then they kind of fell off. I heard Foxy's really good into Dofi. I heard Foxy's probably decent into you know, probably Blackbeard, maybe Purple. No, I think Purple Luffy destroys Foxy. But regardless, I have to test. I don't know, but it's on the list. Finally, once again, expect videos corresponding to the builds that I try, my thoughts on every deck, and thank you for watching. Don't want to make this video too long. Please, you know, leave a like and subscribe to follow our journey.